The summer sun hung low over Nakajima Airfield like a spent shell casing, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. It was July 2nd, 1943, and the air shimmered with heat, thick with the scent of avgas and sun-baked earth. In the distance, the Pacific whispered its endless rhythm against the shore. But here, on this stretch of Oda's industrial fringe, the world narrowed to the gleam of aluminum and the low growl of idling engines. She sat there, the Nakajima G5N Shinszan, her 4 Mitsubishi Kase radials purring uneasily, as if protesting the weight of expectation. 65 feet from wingtip to wingtip, her fuselage stretched like a silver serpent, broad and unyielding, her bomb bay doors sealed shut for now. Empty, but heavy with promise. Propaganda sheets from Tokyo had dubbed her Japan's flying fortress, a direct challenge to the American behemoth that had been raining hell on the islands for months. She was meant to soar across the vastness of the ocean, to strike at the heart of the enemy homeland, her 7,900-pound bomb load delivered with the precision of a katana. But up close, in the harsh light of midday, she didn't look like a fortress. She looked like a trap. Ground crewmen in oil-stained coveralls swarmed around her undercarriage, their faces etched with the quiet fatigue of men who had seen too many machines betray their riders. Hydraulic jacks whined as they adjusted the flaps, and a young mechanic wiped sweat from his brow, glancing up at the cockpit canopy with something akin to pity. The Shinszan's skin was flawless, rivets tight, panels smooth, but there was a subtle quiver to her frame, a faint tremor that passed through the metal like a shiver down a spine. It was the vibration, they said. The engines fought each other, their props chewing the air unevenly, and the whole airframe seemed to groan under the strain of her own mass. At 18 tons fully loaded, she was a mountain trying to masquerade as a bird. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka stood at the edge of the tarmac, his flight jacket unbuttoned against the humidity, a cigarette dangling unlit from his lips. At 28, he was lean and composed, his dark eyes steady beneath the brim of his cap. His record spoke of calm under fire, low-level raids over Guadalcanal in a battered G4M Betty, threading through flak bursts that had claimed lesser men. He'd nursed engines with failing oil pressure, ridden thermal updrafts over jungle canopies to evade Zeros turned against their own. Decorations pinned to his chest, a rising sun for valor, a commendation from Rabal, marked him as reliable, unflappable, the kind of pilot the Navy called upon when others faltered. But today, as he stared at the Shinszan, Tanaka felt the first crack in that facade. His hands, usually steady on the stick, clenched at his sides. This wasn't a Betty with her familiar quirks and forgiving lines. This was something new, something wrong. Whispers had reached him in the officers' mess 2 nights prior. The second prototype had odgered in off the coast last month, taking Major Kira and his crew with it. Kira, the old hand from the China campaign, had radioed a single word before the end: unstable, and then silence. The official report called it pilot error, but Tanaka knew better. Pilots didn't err when the machine itself conspired against them. Captain Tanaka. A voice called from the hangar shadows, clipped and formal. Lieutenant Mori emerged, his co-pilot, all of 23 and built like a reed in a typhoon. Mori's uniform was impeccable, but his eyes darted like a man scanning for ghosts. He clutched a clipboard, the flight manifest fluttering in the breeze. Winds are steady at 8 knots from the east, ceiling unlimited. She's fueled to half, 600 gallons per nacelle. No issues on pre-flight. Tanaka nodded, lighting his cigarette at last. The flame flickered, mirroring the unease in his gut. No issues, that's what they said about Kira's bird. Mori swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was the superstitious one, the crewman who slipped Shinto talismans into his escape kit, who murmured prayers to the wind kami before every hop. In the Betty raids, he'd been the voice of levity, cracking jokes about American gunners with aim like drunkards. But here, with the Shinszan looming, his humor had evaporated. This one's different, sir. Matsumura-san's tweaks, the reinforced spars, the redistributed ballast, she'll handle like a dream. Tanaka exhaled smoke, watching it curl toward the bomber's underbelly. A dream, perhaps, or a nightmare dressed in silk. He thought of the briefings, the sketches he'd pored over in the dim light of his quarters. The Shinszan was born of desperation, a Navy specification from 39 demanding a bomber to eclipse the B-17. Range enough to touch Hawaii from Tokyo, speed to outrun Hellcats, armor to shrug off 50 cal fire. Nakajima had answered with ambition, Chief Engineer Kenichi Matsumura at the helm, a man whose name evoked quiet reverence in the design shops. Matsumura, with his wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers, had sketched her lines from smuggled American blueprints, adapting the fortress's boxy grace to Japanese precision. He'd promised equilibrium, a machine that would carry the Emperor's will across the waves. But promises were fragile things, like the rice paper they were printed on. The prototypes had arrived in '41, their Pratt & Whitney engines, bootlegged through neutral ports, howling with imported fury. Yet even those had faltered. The airframe too flexible, the center of gravity shifting like sand in a storm. By '43, with war closing in, they'd switched to native cassettes, and the vibrations had worsened. The wings flexed in turbulence, the tail yawed without warning. She climbed sluggishly, her stall speed a hair trigger from disaster. Tanaka flicked his cigarette away, grinding it under his boot. "Let's get her in the air, Mori, before she decides to stay planted." They approached the ladder, the ground crew snapping salutes. The access hatch yawned open, a maw of shadow and leather. Tanaka climbed first, his boots echoing on the rungs, the metallic tang of fresh paint and hydraulic fluid greeting him. The cockpit was a cathedral of gauges and levers, altimeter ticking softly, mixture controls gleaming under the overhead light. He settled into the pilot's seat, the harness buckling with a click that felt final. Mori slid in beside him, flipping switches with practiced efficiency, while in the waist, radioman Ensign Kato and dorsal gunner Petty Officer Sato strapped in, their faces pale masks in the gloom. Tanaka's hands found the throttles, 4 black levers worn smooth by test hands before his. He ran through the checklist in his mind. Trims neutral, cowl flaps open, props fine. The engines coughed to life one by one, first a sputter, then a roar that shook the airframe like a fever. Vibration hummed through the yoke, a deep thrum that set his teeth on edge. It was as if the Shinszan resented being awakened, her radials straining against mounts designed for lighter burdens. "Tower, Shinszan 1-1 ready for departure." Tanaka keyed the radio, his voice even, betraying none of the tightness in his chest. "Cleared for takeoff, 1-1. Wind 270 at 6. Good hunting." The tower's reply crackled, laced with the rote optimism of men who never left the ground. Tanaka advanced the throttles, the roar building to a thunder that drowned the world. The brakes released and she lurched forward, ponderous, her nose wheel bumping over seams in the runway. 60 knots, 70. The airspeed needle crept like a man evading shadows. 80, and the tail began to lift, but sluggishly, as if reluctant to commit. Tanaka eased back on the stick, willing her up, but the controls resisted, heavy, viscous, like stirring oil. "Come on, girl," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The end of the runway rushed closer, a blur of white lines and gravel. Mori gripped his armrests, whispering under his breath, "Kami-sama, grant us wings." At 90 knots she broke ground, but not cleanly. The left wing dipped, a sudden lurch that sent the altimeter spinning wildly. Tanaka jammed the rudder, countering the yaw, his muscles burning as he hauled the yoke. Alarms wailed faintly, low airspeed, stall warning, and for a heartbeat, the horizon tilted, the earth filling the canopy like a grave. Then, with a shudder that rattled the rivets, she leveled, climbing at a shallow 300 feet per minute. The vibration intensified, a metallic heartbeat pounding through the floorboards. Below, the airfield shrank. The hangars like toys, the crewmen, frozen statues watching her ascent. Among them stood Kenichi Matsumura, arms crossed over his clipboard, his face a study in controlled anguish. At 52, he was a ghost of the man who'd once dreamed of bridging oceans with steel. His hair, graying at the temples, whipped in the prop wash, and behind his glasses, his eyes tracked every wobble, every tremor. This was his 3rd child in the air today. The first 2 prototypes lost to the sea, their logs burned to ash. He'd poured his life into her, nights redrawing wing spars, mornings arguing with Navy inspectors over weight tolerances. "She will fly," he'd insisted in the design room, his voice steady as he sketched load-bearing curves. "She must." But as the Shinszan banked unsteadily toward the coast, her shadow skimming the waves like a specter, Matsumura felt the lie settle in his bones. The cassettes were underpowered, the fuselage too whippy under torque. He'd known it in the wind tunnel tests. The models had danced erratically in the gusts, but the admirals had demanded production, prestige over perfection. Now, watching Tanaka wrestle her through the thermals, he wondered if pride could be weighed in lives. Up in the cockpit, Tanaka banked into a gentle turn, testing the ailerons. They bit late, the roll sluggish, and a fresh wave of vibration coursed through the frame, loose panels rattling like distant gunfire. Oil pressure flickered on engine 3, down to 60 psi, teetering on the red line. "Mori, monitor number 3, she's coughing." "Copy, sir. RPM steady at 2400. Mori's voice was tight, his knuckles white. In the back, Kato's radio hissed static, the crew exchanging glances that needed no words. They circled the field at 2,000 feet, the sea a glittering expanse below. Tanaka trimmed for level flight, but the nose wandered left, demanding constant input. It was like flying a raft in rapids, every correction birthing another imbalance. Sweat soaked his collar, the cockpit a sauna of fumes and fear. This isn't flying, he thought, the words etching into his mind like a scar. This is surviving. At 12 minutes airborne, he keyed the radio again. "Tower, Shinszan 1-1, returning to base. All systems nominal." The lie slipped out easily, no need to voice the dread coiling in his gut. The landing was worse, a floaty descent, the gear screeching as tires kissed concrete. She rolled to a halt, engines winding down to whispers, and the silence that followed was heavier than the takeoff roar. Tanaka unbuckled, stepping onto the tarmac with legs that felt borrowed. Mori followed, pale and silent, while the crew piled out, avoiding each other's eyes. Matsumura approached, his footsteps measured. "Captain, your impressions?" Tanaka met his gaze, seeing the fracture there, the engineer's hope warring with knowledge. "She fights to stay up, Matsumura-san, like a man drowning in armor." The older man nodded, jotting a note, but his hand trembled. Around them, the ground crew swarmed again, prepping for the next soul to tempt fate. The Shinszan sat inert once more, her silver skin cooling in the dying light, innocent as a blade before the strike. Even its creators held their breath when it took off. The fluorescent hum of the Nakajima design office cut through the midnight hush like a distant air raid siren, a relentless drone that mirrored the pulse in Kenichi Matsumura's temples. It was late autumn 1939, and the room, tucked into the bowels of the Musashino factory, far from the polished showrooms where admirals preened over mock-ups, reeked of solder flux and stale tea. Blueprints unrolled across drafting tables like the entrails of some mechanical leviathan, their ink lines crisp under the glare of shaded lamps. Matsumura hunched over his board, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, a pencil clutched like a talisman in his ink-blackened fingers. At 48, he was the quiet force behind Nakajima's ascent, a man whose mind mapped stresses and strains as others charted stars. Born to a family of Kyoto clockmakers, he'd risen through the Imperial University on theorems of aerodynamics, his dissertation a treatise on wing loading that had caught the eye of the Navy's procurement board. Now, with war's shadow lengthening over the Pacific, they had summoned him for something grander. A bomber to humble the American giant, a machine that would carry the rising sun to the enemy's doorstep. The specification had arrived by courier that September, sealed in wax and stamped with the chrysanthemum seal, G5N, long-range heavy bomber. Range, 3,000 nautical miles. Payload, 8,000 pounds. Speed, 250 knots. Armor, proof against 50 caliber fire. Matsumura traced the outline of a fuselage on his vellum, his breath fogging the paper. Japan's B-17, the brief had called it, invoking the fortress with a mix of envy and defiance. Reports from intelligence, smuggled via Berlin's shadowy networks, painted the American bird in vivid strokes, boxy wings slicing through flak storms, 4 right cyclones shrugging off hits that would shred a zero. The B-17 was a symbol, a steel hymn to industrial might, its production lines churning out fortresses faster than Japan could forge katanas. Matsumura's task was audacious, not to copy, but to eclipse, adapt the fortress's deep belly for torpedoes, her high wing for carrier ops, her endurance for strikes on Pearl Harbor from the home islands. "Kenichi-san, it's past 2, murmured his assistant, young Takahashi, stifling a yawn as he stacked slide rules. The office held a dozen souls still at work, drafters with hunched shoulders, calculators tapping away at fuel curves. But the air grew heavier, the lamps casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Matsumura didn't look up. The admirals wait for no clock, Takahashi-kun, nor do the skies. His voice was soft, almost paternal, but laced with the steel of obsession. This was his redemption, his legacy. A decade earlier, in the Manchurian trials, his light bomber designs had faltered in Siberian gales, costing pilots he still dreamed of. The G5N would be different, flawless, unyielding. He'd pore over captured American schematics, pieced together from a downed B-17 off Wake Atoll. The bomb bay's clever sequencing, the tail gunner's blister like an unblinking eye. By lantern light in his Musashino flat, he'd redraw them, metricizing imperial measures, infusing Japanese elegance, tapered nacelles, a sleeker empennage. But obsession bred isolation. His wife, Yumi, had taken the children to her sisters in Osaka, weary of the ghost, who came home smelling of blueprints and vanished into his study. For the Empire, he'd whisper to the empty room, but the words tasted hollow. The Navy's pressure mounted like monsoon rains. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself had penned a marginal note on the spec sheet. This bird must fly where the enemy sleeps. Production quotas loomed, resources strained by the China quagmire. Aluminum rations halved monthly, skilled welders siphoned to zero lines. Matsumura pushed his team harder, nights blurring into dawns, coffee grounds recycled in thermoses until they were bitter as regret. By spring 1940, the mock-up took shape in Hangar 7, a wooden skeleton draped in canvas, her lines echoing the fortress but refined, almost poetic. Matsumura walked her length daily, his hand trailing the ribs, imagining the wind's caress. The engines would be the crown, licensed Pratt & Whitneys, smuggled through Dutch East Indies traders, their 1,200 horsepower growl a borrowed thunder. She will be light on the water, heavy on the heart, he sketched in his journal, the words a mantra against doubt. The first signs of disaster crept in like fog off Tokyo Bay, subtle at first, dismissed as growing pains. Wind tunnel tests in June revealed flecks in the spars, the high-aspect wings, meant for lift, warped under simulated gusts, twisting the ailerons like a leaf in a gale. Reinforce the box beams, Matsumura ordered, redlining the drawings with fresh calculations. But the added struts shaved range, ballast shifts played havoc with trim. Takahashi raised it in a late-night huddle, his voice tentative. The center of gravity, sensei. It's aft heavy with the fuel tanks forward, like a sumo wrestler on stilts. Matsumura waved it off, his eyes bloodshot. We'll balance it in flight. The fortresses have their quirks. Ours will sing true. Pride, that insidious alloy, hardened in his chest. He couldn't admit the flaw, not with the Navy brass touring the hangar, their epaulets gleaming under floodlights. Admiral Sato, a hawkish man with a scar from Tsushima's echoes, had arrived unannounced one July afternoon, his entourage trailing like destroyers in formation. Magnificent, Matsumura-san, Sato boomed, clapping a hand on the mock-up's flank. The wood creaked under the impact, a faint protest. This will be the hammer to crack America's shell. Range to Honolulu, bombs to blacken their yards. The Emperor will honor you. Matsumura bowed, his smile a mask. We serve the divine wind, Admiral. She flies by December. Inside, the tremor stirred. The mock-up's weight distribution, tested with sandbags, had listed to port, the tail dragging like an anchor. Sato's eyes narrowed, sensing the hesitation. December, or heads will roll. We've lost too many to inferior birds. This one carries our future. The pressure coiled tighter. That night, alone with the blueprints, Matsumura lit a cigarette, his one vice, pilfered from American packs, and exhaled smoke that curled like question marks. Quirks, he told himself. The fortresses had them, tail heaviness, supercharger stalls. His team worked feverishly, welding prototypes in secret bays, the air acrid with arc flashes. By October, the first airframe rolled out, Prototype 1, her silver skin unpainted, raw as a wound. Ground runs revealed the vibration. A harmonic resonance from the props, the blades sinking into a shudder that loosened rivets like teeth in a fistfight. It's the torque, Takahashi reported, wiping grease from his face after a static test. The engines had howled, but the frame had danced, panels buzzing like hornets. The Kaseis, we can't get the Pratts fast enough. Native radials, but they're under-torqued for the mass. Matsumura stared at the telemetry graphs, lines spiking like fever charts. Switch to Mitsubishis? Redesign the mounts? Time slipped away, carriers steaming south toward Indochina. He approved patches, stiffer dampers, weighted hubs, but they were bandages on a fracture. In December, with Prototype 1 towed to the test strip at Tachikawa, the first taxi run exposed the lie. The nose yawed sharply at 40 knots, the rudder pedals fighting like live wires. The test driver, a grizzled warrant officer, cut the engines after 100 yards, his face ashen. She pulls left like a demon, Matsumura-san. Feels like she's got a mind to bury herself. The report went to Sato's desk, buried under requisitions for dive bombers. Minor adjustments, Matsumura minuted, his signature a flourish of denial. But in the quiet hours, doubt gnawed. The airframe was a compromise. Aluminum thin to save weight, spars shortened for factory jigs. She'd been rushed, forged in the fire of necessity rather than the forge of patience. For the Empire, he repeated, but the words echoed hollow, a prayer to gods who favored the prepared. January 1941 brought the first flight. Prototype 1 squatted on the frost-rimed runway, her props idling with a cough that spoke of indigestion. Matsumura watched from the tower, binoculars pressed to his eyes, heart hammering like a loose conrod. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander Hayashi, a veteran of the Shanghai runs, saluted from the cockpit, his grin defiant. Throttles forward, she lumbered down the strip, tail lifting at 70, airborne at 95. For a glorious minute, she climbed straight and true, the sun glinting off her wings like approval from the heavens. Then the signs bloomed, a wing dip uncorrected, the airspeed bleeding as vibration clawed at the controls. Hayashi radioed calm, handling nominal minor trim input, but Matsumura saw the truth in the wobble, the way she porpoised like a porpoise in chop. The landing was a skid, gear kissing grass off the runway edge, tires smoking. Hayashi taxied back, popping the canopy with a face slicked in sweat. She flies, Kenichi-san, but it's like wrestling an eel, slippery, and it hates you for it. Matsumura nodded, forcing a clap on the shoulder, but the engineer's mind raced ahead. Stall tests tomorrow, load factors next week. The Navy scheduled a review in February, Sato demanding a demo. Whispers spread through the shops, the heavy birds got the shakes, but loyalty sealed lips. Matsumura retreated to his board, redrawing dampers, recalculating CG shifts, the pencil lead snapping under pressure. By March, Prototype 2 joined her sister, Tweaks Incorporated. Beefier tailplanes, engine baffles to tame the buzz. But the core flaw lingered, the weight, 18 tons of ambition stacked on wings meant for 15. Fuel for the long haul sloshed forward, pulling the nose down, bombs aft yawed her into spins. In a gusty trial, 2's aileron jammed mid-turn, the wing dropping 40 degrees before recovery. Hayashi's voice over the wire, "Close one, she's got a mind of her own up here." Matsumura's journal filled with marginalia. Harmonics at 2400 RPM, flex at 150 knots, redesign or scrap? Scrap was treason, redesign, impossibility. The war escalated, Malaya falling, carriers launching zeros over Darwin. The G5N was sidelined for fighters, but Sato's memos arrived like artillery. Accelerate. Lives depend on her range. In the spring of 41, as cherry blossoms choked the Yodo River, Matsumura stood before his team, the mock-up looming behind like a judgment. "Gentlemen, she is our sword. We sharpen her, or we fall on it." Applause rippled, but eyes held shadows. Takahashi lingered after, voice low. "Sensei, the math doesn't lie. She's overbuilt for her bones." Matsumura met his gaze, the weight of worlds in his chest. "Math bends to will, Takahashi, as do we all." But that night, alone, he traced the B-17's lines once more, envying their stolid grace. His creation was a mirror, ambitious, brittle, trembling under the strain of dreams too vast. They wanted to rival America's strength, but built a monument to their own fear. The monsoon rains of August 1943 battered Nakajima Airfield like a vengeful spirit, turning the tarmac into a slick mirror that reflected the Shinszan's distorted silhouette. Water sheeted off her wings in silvery curtains, pooling around the undercarriage in oily puddles that smelled of rubber and regret. It had been a month since Tanaka's first flight, and the bomber had logged 20 hours in the air. Each one a grudging concession from physics, each one etching deeper lines into the faces of her handlers. The hangars echoed with the low mutter of conversations cut short. The clink of tools dropped a beat too soon. Pilots rotated through her like sentries at a cursed gate. Volunteers first, then the unlucky, then Tanaka, the steady one, the man who wouldn't break. In the officers' quarters, a squat Quonset hut leaking at the seams, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka sat at a scarred wooden desk, the single bulb overhead swaying like a hanged man in the draft. Rain drummed on the corrugated roof, a rhythm that matched the ache in his temples. Before him lay a plain cloth-bound notebook, its pages already half filled with entries scrawled in pencil, the lead smudged from thumb pressure. It wasn't an official log. Those went to the brass, sanitized and stamped. This was his confessional, hidden under the floorboard with his lucky charm, a faded photo of his sister in Kyoto, smiling against a backdrop of temple lanterns. For when the words need to breathe, he'd told himself on the first night, after the vibrations had left his hands numb. He uncapped his pen, the nib scratching softly against the paper. August 15th, 1943. Flight 4. Takeoff at 600, visibility 3 miles in drizzle. Engines lit without protest, but number 2 surged unevenly, prop RPM fluctuating 200 cycles. Climb rate 280 FPM, down from nominal. At 5,000 feet, entered light chop. Airframe harmonics kicked in at 2,200 RPM. Yoke feedback like stirring concrete. Mori prayed the whole circuit. Landed hot, brakes smoked. She's not unstable, she's unwilling. Tanaka paused, rubbing his eyes. The truth was seeping into his bones, a slow corrosion. Each flight peeled back another layer. The Shinszan didn't buck like a wild horse. She resisted. Every input met with a delay, a quiver that built like resentment. In the Betty, he'd felt the machine as an extension, a partner in the dance of survival. Here it was adversarial, the controls whispering not today through the hydraulic lines. He thought of Major Kira's last transmission, the single word that hung in debriefs like smoke, unstable. But it was more, a betrayal, metal turning on flesh. Across the base, in the shadowed alcove of the mess hall, Lieutenant Mori nursed a cup of barley tea gone cold, his fingers tracing the edge of a worn Ofuda charm. The room was dim, lit by a kerosene lantern that flickered shadows across the faces of the crew. Kato the radioman, hunched over a crossword. Sato the gunner, polishing his Type 98 machine gun with ritual care. They were the survivors so far, the ones who'd drawn the short straws but lived to draw again. Mori's voice broke the hush, low and edged with the tremor of confession. "It's the wings, I tell you," he said, eyes on the steam rising from his cup. "Too broad, like sails in a gale. I felt it on the last hop, updraft off the coast, and she rolled 20 degrees uncommanded." Tanaka-san hauled her back, but gods the groan, like bones cracking. Kato looked up, his spectacles fogged. At 25, he was the intellectual, the one who quoted Sun Tzu between Morse bursts. But tonight, his wit was absent, replaced by a hollow stare. Not just the wings, the engines. Kaseis are workhorses for the Jills, not this beast. Torque builds in the mounts. It's twisting her spine. I heard the rivets sing on descent last week. Sing, then pop. Sato grunted, oil-blackened rag twisting in his fist. He was the oldest at 32, scarred from a Betty ditching off Tarawa, his left ear notched by shrapnel. Pop? Try the stall. At 120 knots, she hangs there, nose high like she's deciding whether to fall. I was in the turret, saw the horizon spin. Thought of my boy in Hiroshima, waiting for letters that won't come. His voice cracked, the words hanging heavy. They all had ghosts. Families in the path of the firebombers. Brothers lost to submarine wolf packs. The Shinszan wasn't just a test bird. She was a thief, stealing tomorrow's one quiver at a time. Mori leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper that the rain nearly swallowed. And the curse? You heard about Prototype 0, the one they scrapped before Kira? Ground crew found a rat's nest in the wiring, chewed clean. But it wasn't rats. It was the vibrations, starting early. She's got a commie inside, angry at being caged. Superstition, yes, but in the wet dark it felt like truth. The base had its rituals now. Salt lines across thresholds, sake offerings before pre-flight. Tanaka scoffed at it in public, but his logbook held the seed. Felt eyes on us today, or maybe just the weight. The next morning dawned bruised purple, the clouds parting like a reluctant shroud. Tanaka strapped in for Flight 5, the cockpit familiar now, its odors a toxic perfume, leather sweat-soaked, gauges fogged with breath. Mori beside him, checklist in hand. Kato aft, testing the intercom with a tinny check 1 check. The engines wound up, that familiar cough resolving into a roar that vibrated the fillings in Tanaka's teeth. Takeoff was routine, brakes off, acceleration building like a held breath. Airborne at 92 knots, a touch better than before. But at pattern altitude, the devil showed its hand. "Trim's fighting me," Tanaka said into the mic, voice level as he masked the strain. The elevator lagged, the nose wandering up 5 degrees before correcting. Vibration hummed through the seat, a low-frequency buzz that set the altimeter needle jittering. Mori monitored the dials, his face a mask of forced calm. "Fuel flow steady, sir, but temp on 3 is climbing, 180 Celsius. They pushed into a shallow bank, testing the turn. The ailerons bit, then stuck. A microsecond of glue, the wing dropping sharply. Tanaka countered with rudder, but the yaw coupled into a roll, the Shinszan slipping sideways like a drunk on ice. Alarms chimed, bank angle, airspeed decay. Below the sea churned gray, whitecaps mocking their fragility. Not now, Tanaka thought, muscles coiling as he hauled the yoke. The frame groaned, a deep metallic protest from the spars, rivets chattering like distant machine gun fire. "She's shedding, sir." Kato's voice crackled from the waist, panic edging the words. A panel had loosened aft, wind whistling through the gap. Sato fired a burst from the dorsal to vent nerves, the recoil a futile anchor. Tanaka leveled her, sweat stinging his eyes, the horizon steadying at last. But the trust was fractured, each flight peeled it thinner. They landed with a thud that jarred spines, tires screeching as the props clawed for reverse. Debrief was a ritual of half-truths. Admiral Sato's liaison, a sharp-faced lieutenant from Tokyo, scribbled notes while Tanaka spoke of manageable quirks. "She's settling, Excellency. A few more tweaks? Matsumura-san's on the dampers." The liaison nodded, but his eyes held the skepticism of a man who'd read the crash reports. Kira's bird had gone in wings level, engines at full psalm, yet augured straight down. Structural failure, the autopsy said, but whispers pointed to the vibrations harmonizing into a fatal flex. That night, Tanaka's pen flew across the page. Flight 5, uncommanded roll at 1,800 feet. Recovered, but lost 40 knots in the slip. Crew shaken, Mori's charm fell from his pocket midair, he dove for it like a lifeline. The Shinszan doesn't forgive hesitation. She's a mirror to us, proud on the ground, fragile aloft. Japan builds empires of steel, but this is our doubt made manifest. Too heavy with hope, too light on forgiveness. Word spread beyond the base, carried on supply runs and coded telegrams. In the Nakajima shops, Matsumura pored over the telemetry, graphs spiking like fever lines. Takahashi hovered, data pads in hand. "Captain Tanaka's notes, Sensei. Aileron bind at low speed. It's the flex again. Wings twisting under load." Matsumura's face was gaunt, cheeks hollowed by sleepless audits. He'd flown with Tanaka once, a co-pilot ride in a trainer years back, feeling the younger man's steady hands. Now, those hands wrestled his mistake, reinforced the hinges, shortened the throw. But his voice lacked conviction. The fixes were incremental, aspirin for a hemorrhage. The Navy's demands echoed. Production by fall. Hawaii within reach. Prestige blinded them, the Shinszan as propaganda talisman, her photo splashed in Asahi Shimbun with captions of inevitable victory. But the pilots knew. She was Japan's facade cracking, the industrial miracle fraying at the seams. September brought typhoon winds, grounding flights for days. In the lull, Tanaka walked the perimeter fence, the sea spray salting his lips. He thought of the larger war. B-29s probing the skies over Saipan, their silver forms harbingers of the fire to come. The Shinszan was meant to counter them, to strike back with long-range fury. Instead, she mirrored the strain, the empire overextended, resources stretched thin, every bolt a compromise. "We're fighting ourselves," he scrawled one rain-lashed evening. "The machine shakes because we do." Flight 6 came on the equinox, skies clear as cut glass. Takeoff smooth, climb steady until the gremlin stirred at 8,000 feet. Engine 3 faltered, a sputter, then a backfire that filled the cockpit with acrid smoke. Oil pressure plummeted, the radial shedding cowling like skin. "Feather it," Tanaka barked, banking away from the plume. Mori complied, the prop windmilling to a halt, but the imbalance yanked them into a yaw, the dead engine dragging like an anchor. Vibration surged, the airframe's harmonic roar drowning the alarms. "Holding, sir. Airspeed 140. Kato's shout, laced with prayer. Sato braced in the turret, the sea rising to meet them. Tanaka trimmed furiously, trading altitude for control, the yoke slick with sweat. They circled the field at 2,000 feet, the dead prop a silver blur, the remaining 3 straining in chorus. Landing was a prayer answered grudgingly. "Gear down, flare." touched down with a lurch that buckled the port strut. She rolled to a halt, smoke trailing, ground crew converging like medics on a battlefield. Mori unstrapped first, vomiting over the sill. "She's killing us by inches, Tanaka-san. One day she won't let go." Tanaka nodded, tasting bile. In the log, Flight 6, engine out at cruise, vibration peaked at 3.2 Gs, felt the spars weep. Crew intact but faith fracturing. "The Shinszan isn't our weapon, she's our warning." Japan reaches for the stars, but gravity pulls harder now. We're not invincible. We're just men in a trembling box. The machine became the metaphor unspoken. Japan's crumbling confidence, the war's weight bowing the spine. Pilots avoided her shadow. Transfers came laced with pleas. Matsumura visited once, clipboard in hand, eyes hollow. "We'll fix her, Captain, for all of you." Tanaka met his gaze, seeing the shared fracture. "Fix the bird, Matsumura-san, or bury the dream with the rest." But dreams die slow, and the flights continued, each worse, each a step closer to the edge. It didn't fight the enemy. It fought itself. October 12, 1943, dawned brittle and clear over Nakajima Airfield, the autumn chill sharpening the edges of the world like a whetstone on steel. Frost rimed the grass verges, crunching under the boots of the honor guard assembled along the taxiway. 70 men in starched whites, rifles at present arms, their breaths pluming in unison. Banners snapped in the breeze, crimson suns on white silk proclaiming Imperial Navy aviation, unyielding skies. Overhead, a flight of Zeros droned in lazy echelons, their contrails etching kanji of triumph across the blue. It was no ordinary test hop. This was the showcase, the dog and pony for the high command, where the Shinszan sins would be polished to a gleam and presented as virtues. In the command tent, a canvas pavilion pitched hastily amid the hangars, Admiral Sato held court like a shogun in miniature. His uniform was immaculate, gold braid catching the lantern light, but his eyes, sharp as bayonets, betrayed the impatience of a man who measured progress in sunk carriers. Flanking him sat 3 captains from Buair, clipboards at the ready, and a civilian photographer from Domain News, his Leica slung like a sidearm. Matsumura stood at the periphery, his suit rumpled, a fresh sheaf of revisions clutched to his chest. The tweaks were desperate, hydraulic boosters on the controls, rubber isolators in the engine bays. "She'll hold," he'd assured Sato in the pre-dawn huddle. For the demo, at least. But holding was a relative term. The telemetry from Tanaka's last sortie, Flight 7, a low-level run that had nearly kissed the waves, painted a grim portrait. Wing flex at 2.8 Gs, harmonic peaks shredding aileron cables. Matsumura had buried the worst in footnotes, the Admiral's gaze too fixed on the horizon of victory. "Propaganda first, physics later," Sato had grunted, slapping the table. Today, the Shinszan would perform a 20-minute circuit, climb to 10,000 feet, a mock bomb run on buoys off the coast, a high-speed pass for the cameras. Success meant funding, failure, the scrapyard. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka arrived at the flight line as the sun crested the hills, his crew trailing like shadows. The Shinszan squatted under floodlights, her silver hide burnished to a mirror sheen, ground crew polishing the props until they hummed with reflected light. She looked the part, majestic, unassailable, but Tanaka knew the rot beneath. The spar cracks spider webbing under paint, the fuel lines chafed from vibration. His logbook, secreted in his quarters, bore the scars. October 8th, Flight 7. Engine surge at 80% throttle, backfired like artillery. Mori's hands shook on the board, Sato froze in the turret. "She's a widowmaker waiting for her groom." Mori caught his arm as they neared the ladder, voice a urgent whisper amid the salute of the guard. "Sir, the winds are picking up, gusts to 15 offshore, and the barometer's falling. We can delay, say maintenance on the radios." Tanaka's jaw tightened, eyes on the Admiral's tent where laughter spilled like false confidence. Delay meant questions, and questions invited scrutiny, the kind that ended careers. "The brass doesn't wait for weather, Mori. Nor do we." But inside, the fracture widened. This wasn't a solo jaunt. The crew was full today. 8 souls, including a Navy observer jammed in the navigator's nook, his briefcase of charts a leaden reminder of the stakes. Tanaka had argued for a skeleton run, but Sato's orders were iron. Full loadout, full performance. Show them the fortress we promised. They climbed aboard in ritual silence, the hatch clanging shut like a vault door. The cockpit enveloped them in its familiar claustrophobia. harnesses biting into shoulders, the faint ozone tang of charged batteries. Kato flipped the battery switch, the instrument panel blooming to life. Gauges green for now. Sato the gunner settled into his blister, testing the feeds with a dry click. The observer, Lieutenant Hayashi, a paper pusher with ink-stained cuffs, fidgeted, his presence a chill draft. "Captain, the Admiral expects photographs at apogee. Keep her steady." Tanaka nodded curtly, strapping in. "Steady, as if she listens." Mori ran the checklist, voice mechanical. Flaps down 20, trims tabbed, mixtures lean. The engine stirred at Tanaka's touch, first a burble, then a bellow that shook the airframe like a dog shedding water. Vibration seeped in immediately, a low buzz that set the coffee in Hayashi's thermos rattling. The tower crackled. Shinszan 11, cleared for takeoff. Winds 100 at 12, gusting. Divine winds favor you. 11 rolling, Tanaka replied, advancing the throttles. The runway blurred beneath, acceleration ponderous, the end marker rushing like judgment. 80 knots. 90. The tail lifted, but the left wing sagged, wind teasing the high aspect ratio into a dance. Tanaka fed in right aileron, muscles already burning, and she broke ground at 95, a lurch, not a leap, the undercarriage folding with a hydraulic sigh. Gear up, flaps up, and they were airborne, climbing into the chill strata where the air bit sharper. The first 5 minutes were merciful. Straight and level at 2,000 feet, the coast unrolling below like a faded scroll, pine-cloaked hills giving way to the slate-gray Pacific. Cameras on the ground whirred, capturing the silhouette against the sun, the Shinszan a silver arrow in ascent. Matsumura watched from the tower, binoculars steady, but his pulse betrayed him, each gust visible in the wing's subtle flex, a ripple under the skin. Hold, child, he thought, the blueprints of his youth mocking him now. Just this once. At 6,000 feet, the gremlins stirred. A crosswind from the east, funneled by the headlands, buffeted them broadside. The Shinszan yawed left, unbidden, the rudder pedals lagging like numb limbs. Tanaka trimmed into it, but the vibration built, a harmonic whine at 2,300 RPM, the prop sinking into discord. "Mori, boost pressure, give me full well." The co-pilot complied, levers forward, but the surge only amplified the shake, the yoke pulsing in Tanaka's grip like a live thing. "Sir, number 4's oil temp spiking, 210 Celsius, Mori reported, voice edged. Hayashi leaned forward, peering at the dials. "Is this nominal?" the Admiral said. "Nominal for now," Tanaka cut in, his calm a fragile veneer. Below, the buoys bobbed, mock targets for the run, painted red for the lenses. He rolled into the dive, nose down 15 degrees, airspeed building to 220 knots. The Shinszan responded sluggishly, the dive brakes reluctant, wind howling through the bomb bay like a banshee. For a heartbeat, she stabilized, the horizon steadying as they leveled for the pass. Ground crews waved flags, shutters clicked, propaganda in motion. Then betrayal. At the pullout, 1,500 feet and climbing, Engine 3 coughed, a wet hack, followed by a plume of black smoke that fouled the canopy. Oil pressure zeroed, the radial windmilling into a feathered halt, but not cleanly. The prop bit air unevenly, dragging torque like a sea anchor. The imbalance hit like a hammer. The nose dropped, the right wing rising in a Dutch roll that slewed them 30 degrees off heading. Alarms wailed, yaw damper fail, engine out, drowning Hayashi's yelp. "What in the Emperor's name?" "Quiet," Tanaka snapped, hauling the yoke, rudder hard over. The airframe groaned, a deep torsion from nose to tail, rivets chattering in protest. Vibration peaked, the floor vibrating up his legs, blurring the gauges. Mori fought the mixtures on the survivors, but the shake loosened a panel aft, wind screaming through the gap, papers from Hayashi's case swirling like confetti in a typhoon. In the turret, Sato braced, his gun mount rattling loose. "She's coming apart, Captain. The mounts, they're shearing." Kato's voice crackled from the waist. Intercoms glitching, static everywhere. "Orders, sir?" The observer clutched his armrest, face drained, the demo forgotten in the raw calculus of survival. Tanaka's mind narrowed to the essentials. Airspeed 160, altitude bleeding to 800 feet, the sea a glittering grave below. Orders from the tower would come soon. Maintain course, complete the run. Blind edicts from men in tents. But the Shinszan was unraveling, the dead engine's drag coupling into a spiral, the controls mushy with hydraulic lag. Full power, shallow turn back to base, the protocol demanded. But that meant fighting her into the wind, the gusts amplifying the roll. risking a snap stall over the breakers. No, not today, not with them aboard. Tanaka's decision crystallized in the chaos, a defiance born of the logbook's quiet truths, the crew's unspoken trust. Mori, Feather 2 and 4, dumped the fuel from the mains, were ditching protocols, shallow glide to the bay, away from the rocks. Mori's eyes widened, hands freezing on the panel. Sir, that's against regs. Admiral Sato's watching. They'll court-martial. Damn the court, Tanaka growled, banking left into the dead wind, trading speed for lift. The Shinszan protested, wings flexing visibly now, a faint crack audible over the roar, like ice on a pond. We're not dying for a photograph. Kato, signal the tower. Engine failure returning visual. No heroics. Hayashi spluttered. Captain, you can't. The demonstration's over, Lieutenant. Tanaka's voice was steel, unyielding as he eased the nose down. Airspeed stabilizing at 140 knots, the hairy edge of the stall. The vibration eased fractionally with the feathered props. The drag halved, but the airframe still quivered, a beast wounded but raging. Smoke trailed from 3's nacelle, oil streaking the wing like tears. Below, the coastline sharpened, white sands, fishing boats scattering like minnows. The tower's response hissed in, 1-1, maintain altitude. Repeat, maintain and return to pattern. Tanaka keyed the mic, deliberate. Negative, tower, glide path to water, crew safety priority. Static swallowed the reply, but he could imagine Sato's fury, the Admiral's scowls. Propaganda versus reality, the silver bird faltering, her myth cracking midair. They skimmed the dunes at 200 feet, the bay opening like a merciful palm. Tanaka flared gently, the Shinszan settling onto the swells with a shuddering kiss, hull slapping water, props cartwheeling into foam. The impact jarred them forward, harnesses biting, but she floated, the high wing keeping her buoyant. Escape hatches blown, the crew piled into the dinghy, salt spray stinging eyes. Last out, Tanaka paused at the sill, scanning the horizon where rescue launches churned from shore. Mori clapped his shoulder as they rode, voices lost in the chop. You saved us, sir, but the brass. Tanaka met his gaze, the sea's chill seeping through his jacket. The brass will spin it, heroic ditching, lessons learned. But in his mind, the log's final entry formed. Flight 8, demo aborted. Defied orders to live. She's not the enemy, she's the cage we built. On the beach, as medics swarmed and Sato's glare burned from afar, Matsumura approached through the surf, trousers soaked, his revisions sodden in his fist. Captain, you flew her true, better than I designed. Tanaka nodded, tasting brine. Truth doesn't photograph well, Matsumura-san. The Shinszan wallowed offshore, her silver skin dulled by waves, a monument adrift. Cameras captured the salvage, headlines already twisting, valiant test amid gale. But the crew knew. The fracture exposed, the fear laid bare. Heroism isn't fighting the enemy, it's surviving your own side's mistakes. November 3, 1943, carved itself into the annals of Nakajima Airfield not with fanfare, but with the dull thud of inevitability. A day when the sky turned executioner, and the Shinszan claimed her final tribute. The air hung heavy with the promise of winter, a damp chill that seeped through flight jackets and settled in the bones like unspoken accusations. Fog clung to the lowlands, muting the roar of the test strip, but the high command had decreed the flight regardless. One last validation before the prototypes were mothballed for redesign. Admiral Sato's directive had arrived by runner at dawn, terse and unyielding. Full crew, combat load simulation. Prove her worth or consign her to scrap. It was a death sentence dressed as duty, the Navy's blind faith colliding with the machine's recalcitrant truth. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka stood before the Shinszan in the half-light, his breath fogging the crisp air, the bomber's silhouette blurred at the edges like a watercolor in rain. Her skin bore the scars of salvage, patched nacelles from the demo ditching, fresh rivets glinting like stitches on a wound. The ground crew had worked through the night, engine overhauls, spar inspections, but the vibration lingered in their averted eyes, the way hands lingered too long on wrenches as if bidding farewell. Tanaka's crew assembled in silence, Mori, pale and clutching his ofuda like a shield. Kato, spectacles fogged, radio pack slung low. Sato the gunner, his tools laid out with the precision of a man preparing his own pyre. 7 souls total, plus Tanaka. The 8th, the anchor. He'd argued in the briefing tent, voice measured against Sato's bluster. Admiral, the data's clear. Harmonics at full load exceed tolerances. One more hop risks everything. Sato had leaned forward, cigar smoke coiling like a noose. Risk is the Empire's currency, Captain. You've nursed her this far. Finish the ledger. Or shall I find a pilot who honors Bushido over caution? The words landed like flak, shredding Tanaka's resolve. Duty wasn't a choice. It was the harness that bound them all. Back in his quarters, he'd added to the logbook one final time, the pencil lead snapping mid-sentence. Flight 9. Combat Sim. Crew briefed on ejections. If she takes us, let it be quick. Mori asked for my sister's address, told him to burn it if we don't return. The Shinszan doesn't kill cleanly, she consumes. Matsumura watched from the hangar mouth, a specter in wool overcoat, his revisions, a futile stack of ballast charts, tucked under arm. Sleep had evaded him since the ditching. Nightmares replayed the telemetry in reverse, the spikes inverting into graves. He'd cornered Sato post-demo, voice cracking. Give me time, Admiral. Redesign the wing routes, it's the torque shear. Sato's reply had been a glacier. Time is the enemy's ally, Matsumura. Fly her, fix her post-mortem. The Renzan waits in the wings. The G5N, Nakajima's Phoenix project. Lighter, refined, born of Shinzan's blood. But phoenixes rose from specific ashes, and Matsumura knew these would be his. Tanaka saluted the engineer as he passed, a nod heavy with shared complicity. For the record, Matsumura-san, she's flown true in my hands. Whatever comes. The words trailed unspoken. Blame the bird, not the man. Matsumura gripped his arm, glasses fogging. You've given her grace I couldn't engineer. Fly safe, Captain. The sea forgives no one. Tanaka climbed the ladder, fruit the rungs cold under gloves, the cockpit greeting him with its stale embrace, fumes of dope and oil, the yoke scarred from white-knuckled grips. Mori strapped in, checklist a murmur. Trims set, fuel cross-feed off. Prayers said. The crew settled aft, harnesses clicking like cocked hammers, the bomb bay loaded with concrete dummies, 3,000 pounds of simulated fury, shifting the CG aft like a premonition. Engines ignited in sequence, the cassettes bellowing to life with a tremor that rattled the canopy glass. Vibration hummed immediate, a baseline throb at idle, the props idling unevenly. Tower clearance came crisp, 1-1 runway 09 clear, winds calm, ceiling 500, bring her home. Tanaka advanced throttles, the surge pressing them back, acceleration building grudgingly through the fog. 80 knots, the world a white blur. 90, tail up. 95, airborne with a wallow that slewed left. He countered instinctively, rudder pedals slick with condensation, the undercarriage retracting with a whine that echoed doubt. Climb was shallow, fog parting reluctantly to reveal the slate sea below. At 1,000 feet, they broke through, the horizon a razor line where water met mist. Instruments steady, airspeed 150 RPM 2400, but the shake built. A resonant growl from the nacelles, loose panels aft whistling like tea kettles. All green here. Kato radioed from the waist, but his tone held the lie. Mori monitored, fingers drumming the panel. Number 3's temp edging up, sir. Watch the mixtures. Tanaka nodded, trimming nose up, the dummy's weight pulling like an anchor on a chain. Level at 4,000, heading east into the open water, the mock run commenced. A shallow dive to 2,000. Bomb bay doors cracking open to the slipstream's howl. The Shinszan responded with reluctance, the CG shift amplifying the yaw, wings flexing in the cross-chop. Tanaka pulled out smoothly, the yoke heavy but obedient, the concrete thumping home in simulation. For a fragile span, 8 minutes, she held a silver ghost against the clouds, the crew exhaling in unison. Matsumura, binoculars to eyes from the tower, allowed a flicker of hope. Perhaps today she redeems. Then, the spark. At the turn back to base, 3,500 feet and banking starboard, engine 3 surged, a wet cough, then flames licking the cowling like hungry tongues. Oil ignited in the exhaust, the radial blooming orange against the nacelle, heat warping the panels. Alarms shrieked, fire bell, oil pressure 0, the cockpit filling with acrid smoke that clawed eyes and throats. 3's on fire. Mori choked, hands flying to the extinguisher bottles, but the halon lines were clogged, a factory defect unearthed too late. Tanaka's world tunneled, airspeed bleeding to 130, the dead engine dragging torque, the blaze spreading aft along the wing route, aluminum glowing cherry red. Vibration exploded, harmonics peaking at 3.5 Gs, the airframe torsioned into a shudder that blurred the horizon. Rivets popped like gunfire, the wing dipping under thermal stress, smoke streaming portside in a black banner. Feather it, cut fuel. he barked, banking away from the coast, toward the open sea. Mori yanked the lever, but the prop windmilled free, bits of cowling shedding into the prop wash like confetti from hell. Aft, chaos reigned, Kato coughing in the smoke, radio spitting static. Tower, 1-1, engine fire, returning visual, while Sato fought the turret doors, flames licking the bulkhead. The observer from the demo, borrowed back for notes, retched into his bag, useless now. The blaze jumped, sparks arcing to the fuel lines, a secondary whoosh as vapors caught, the wingtip erupting in a fireball that consumed the aileron. Controls went mush, left roll unarrestable, the Shinszan slewing into a spiral, altitude hemorrhaging at 1,500 feet per minute. "Egress, blow the hatches," Tanaka ordered, voice cutting the din, his hands locked on the yoke in futile arrest. The crew unbuckled in frenzy, oxygen masks fogging, the cabin a furnace of smoke and screams. Mori hesitated, eyes locked on his captain. "Sir, you first, the stick." "Go, damn you," Tanaka roared, slamming the heel of his palm on the dinghy release. The escape hatches jettisoned with explosive cracks, wind howling in, the sea rushing up like a verdict. One by one, they bailed. Kato first, tumbling into the slipstream. Sato next, his bulk snagging the sill before vanishing. The observer clawing out, prayers lost to the gale. Mori lingered, tears carving tracks in soot. "Tanaka-san, my family." "Tell them yourself." "Out." Tanaka shoved him, the co-pilot somersaulting into the void, chute blooming white against the pyre. 6 souls adrift now, the Shinszan a comet trailing fire, spiraling at 500 feet, the waves a fractured mirror below. Alone in the cockpit, Tanaka assessed the ruin. Flames devouring the wings, structure failing, the yoke limp in his grasp. Eject, the canopy jettison jammed, warped by heat, the bailout bell drowned in the roar. He keyed the radio, voice steady as the abyss yawned. "Tower 1-1, fire uncontained, crew away, I'm riding her down, away from the shore. Tell Matsumura, it wasn't the enemy that killed us." Static hissed back, but he imagined the words carrying a final log entry etched in ether. The decision was crystalline, born of the flight's accumulated weight. Crash her seaward, clear of the fishing boats dotting the bay, spare the ground crews the debris field. He nursed the survivors, throttles back on 1 and 2, mixtures cut off on 4, trading the last gasp of lift for direction. The spiral tightened, G-forces pinning him, but he held the nose down, away from the land's fragile lights. At 200 feet, the wing sheared, a crack like thunder, the port stub folding inward, the Shinszan cartwheeling into the drink. Impact was mercifully swift, a thunderclap of spray, the fuselage crumpling like foil, the sea swallowing her in a geyser of foam and fire. Debris bobbed, seats, panels, the logbook's cover fluttering free before sinking. Rescue launches churned out, orange chutes bobbing like buoys. The crew hauled aboard one by one, Mori retching seawater, Kato clutching his radio like a talisman, Sato silent, eyes hollow. 6 saved, the 7th, the observer gone in the tumble, his notes fodder for fish. On shore, Matsumura collapsed to his knees in the tower, the binoculars clattering to the grating. Sato burst in, face thunderous. What madness! Tanaka defied egress. The logs, burned them. This was pilot error, structural sabotage by the crew's panic. The Admiral's orders flew, reports redacted, the crash pinned on unforeseen thermal fault, the Shinszan program shelved without eulogy. Matsumura rose, voice a rasp. "Error? It was our denial, Admiral. The vibrations, the weight, I knew. We all knew." Sato's glare could curdle milk. Knew and built it anyway, for the Empire. Now bury it, or join the wreck. The tent emptied, aides scurrying with files to the incinerator, flames devouring the truth in acrid curls. Matsumura wandered the tarmac alone, the fog reclaiming the strip, the sea's murmur a dirge. Guilt exploded not in shouts but in the silence, a vacuum where words should condemn. He thought of Tanaka's last transmission, looping like a stuck prop. It wasn't the enemy. In his flat that night, under the flicker of a gooseneck lamp, he penned the suppressed addendum. The Shinszan fell not to foes, but to flaws we forged. Tanaka paid the toll. The base mourned in whispers, salutes at dawn, a sake pour for the lost. Mori, bandaged and broken, cornered Matsumura by the hangar. "He saved us, sensei, gave his breath for ours. Tell the families that." Matsumura nodded, throat tight, the weight of unwritten letters crushing. The Navy buried deeper, prototypes scrapped, blueprints archived as lessons, the Renzon fast-tracked on sanitized data. But in the quiet, the guilt festered. Matsumura's hands, once steady on pencils, now trembled at drafts. Sato's memos grew sharper, denial his armor. Days blurred into a gray haze, the war's drumbeat distant. Tanaka's body washed ashore 3 days later, washed clean by tides, uniform shreds clinging like regrets. No hero's funeral, a quiet plot on the bluff, the crew standing vigil as rain pattered on the pine box. Mori laid the Ofuda on the mound, whispering, "You flew her home, Captain, better than any of us." In the end, the sacrifice etched no medals, only absences. The empty seat in the mess, the logbook's ghost pages. Matsumura visited the grave weekly, leaving a pebble from the test strip, the sea's salt etching his skin. The truth, buried like the wreck, fermented in silence, a poison the Empire couldn't outrun. He didn't die for his country. He died because of it. The winter of 1943 settled over Nakajima Airfield like a shroud woven from ash and salt. The winds off the Pacific carrying the faint, acrid tang of charred aluminum long after the Shinszan's pyre had cooled. The test strip lay fallow, weeds prying at the cracks in the concrete, the hangars echoing with the hollow ring of hammers striking nothing. The program was dead, buried in a flurry of classified memos stamped terminated, redesign immediate. Admiral Sato's signature slashed across the orders like a katana's edge, consigning the prototypes to the smelter's maw. Prototype 3, Tanaka's bird, lay in a dredged cradle offshore, her twisted frame a skeletal relic, picked clean by divers for salvageable instruments. The crew dispersed. Mori to a desk in Yokohama, his hands too steady now for the stick. Kato to radio watch on a picket ship. Morse code his only flight. Sato the gunner to the Aleutians, where cold claimed what fire had spared. Kenichi Matsumura moved through the aftermath like a man half erased, his steps measured on the frost-rimed paths between offices. The design shop, once a hive of slide rules and late-night arguments, stood gutted. Drafters reassigned to the G5N Shinszan, the Navy's phoenix born of necessity's forge. Matsumura had been summoned to the project lead, a promotion laced with irony. Learn from the heavy one's sins, Sato had grunted in the handover meeting, a single folder slapped on the table. Inside, sanitized Shinszan logs, the vibrations redacted to anomalies, Tanaka's final words omitted like a heresy. Matsumura nodded, his face a mask of deference, but the folder burned in his grip. Sins, he thought, the word a splinter under skin. The Shinszan would be leaner, shorter wings, twin fins for stability, Homar radials tuned for torque. But every blueprint bore the ghost. Spars thickened by memory, dampers oversized against echoes. By spring 1944, as cherry petals choked the factory drains, the Shinszan took shape in Hangar 12, a sleeker beast, her lines echoing the Shinszan but refined, the excess weight shed like a skin too tight. Matsumura walked her mock-up daily, hand trailing the fuselage as if tracing a scar. Takahashi, his old assistant, now section chief, hovered with fresh calcs. "Sensei, the CG's forward this time. Fuel bays amidships. No more tail-dragging widow." Matsumura nodded, but his eyes lingered on the wing roots, where reinforcements bulged like bruises. The first engine run hummed clean, no resonant growl, the props syncing in choral harmony. Test flights came in June, a volunteer pilot, a young ensign from the carrier pools nursing her aloft without quiver. She climbed briskly, 500 feet per minute, her stall a gentle buffet rather than a snap. Reports flowed to Sato, nominal, stable, ready for production. Matsumura attended the inaugural demo, standing in the tower's chill shadow, binoculars trained on the silver speck wheeling against the clouds. No flames, no sloughs, just clean banks, a mock dive that pulled out with yards to spare. The admiral clapped his shoulder, cigar reeking of victory. "See, Matsumura, from ashes steel. The Shinszan will bomb their yards while the Shinszan, well, she taught us." Matsumura forced a bow, the praise curdling in his throat. "Taught us denial," he reflected, the tower's wind whipping his coattails. The Shinszan flew on, 6 prototypes by autumn, her range trimmed but reliable, 2,500 miles enough to harry the Marianas. Production ramped in 45, a trickle of 20 airframes slipping into squadrons, their bellies heavy with 2,000-pounders dropped on Late's beaches. She wasn't the ocean spanner dreamed, but she endured, surviving where her predecessor had splintered. Yet endurance was no absolution. Matsumura's nights fractured into vigils, the Musashino flat a tomb of blueprints and half-empty sake cups. Yumi returned in fits, her presence a quiet accusation, the children tiptoeing around the man who stared at walls. He'd visit Tanaka's grave on the bluff, the marker a simple slab etched with rank and date, weeds already encroaching. Pebbles accumulated at the base, his ritual, each one from a flight-line seam. "You flew her truths," he'd murmur to the wind, the seas crash below a counterpoint to the silence. Mori wrote once, from his Yokohama post, "The Renzan's up, sensei. Steady as a Betty, but we miss his calm. Tell the kami he landed safe." Matsumura burned the letter, ashes joining the pyre of regrets. The war ground on, its jaws closing, B-29s darkening the skies over Tokyo, firestorms devouring paper cities. Nakajima's lines shifted to jets and suicide divers, the Renzan relegated to coastal patrols, her sisters falling to hellcats in the slot. Matsumura survived the bombings by threads, his flat gutted, the factory a cratered maze rebuilt from rubble. Surrender came in August 45, the Emperor's voice a whisper over crackling radios. The rising sun furled like a spent flag. American boots hit the tarmac at Atsugi, olive drab against the charred earth, their jeeps churning mud as technicians fanned out to catalog the vanquished. It was in the autumn of occupation, under a sky bruised with monsoon promise, that the diary surfaced. A salvage team from the 509th Composite, engineers tasked with reverse engineering the Empire's ghosts, worked the Shinszan wreck site, divers plumbing the bay's murk for relics. Lieutenant Elias Grant, a bespectacled MIT grad with grease under his nails, hooked the sodden bundle on a grapple. Cloth-bound, pages bloated with brine, the cover stamped faintly with a Navy seal. He surfaced sputtering, the find clutched like contraband, and carried it to the beachhead tent where arc lamps hummed over trestle tables. The team gathered, Grant, his CO Major Hale, a translator named Sergeant Ito, fresh from Manzanar. Ito cracked the cover gingerly, salt crystals flaking like snow, the ink bled but legible in Tanaka's precise hand. Entries unspooled. July Tep fights the air like a chained beast. August 15, vibration sings of failure. The flights chronicled, raw as confessions, the quivers, the prayers, the crew's fraying nerves. Ito's voice faltered on the demo, defied orders to live. And the end, Flight 9. "If she takes us, let it be quick. We never feared the Americans, we feared takeoff." Grant leaned in, the tense canvas slapping in the gusts. "This isn't a log, it's a requiem. They're B-17. Hell, it was a guillotine." Hale nodded, cigar smoke coiling toward the ridgepole. "Hubris in rivets. We got fortresses churning out like Model Ts. They chased the dream on ration tin." The diary passed hands, a relic heavier than its weight, Tanaka's words bridging the chasm. Ito, eyes glistening, translated the coda. The Shinszan didn't fall because of design. It fell because of denial. Silence fell, broken only by the surf's murmur, the Americans' triumph muted by the echo of shared frailty. Word trickled up channels, MacArthur's HQ, then stateside briefs. The diary anchored a footnote in the technical reports. IJN Heavy Bomber Program, case study in overambition. Grant kept a photocopy, tucking it into his footlocker for the voyage home. The page is a talisman against his own designs. Years later, in a Cleveland basement workshop, he'd show it to his son over model kits, voice low. "They built monsters from envy, kid, but the pilots, they were just men, holding the sky on faith." Matsumura learned of the find from 47, a clipped article from the Pacific Stars and Stripes smuggled via a former shop foreman. He read it by lantern in his rebuilt flat, Yumi asleep in the next room, the words blurring through spectacles cracked at the rim. American team uncovers pilot's testament. Tanaka's log, preserved in enemy hands, its truths laid bare without reprisal. He folded the paper, tucking it beside the pebbles from the grave, a final entry in his own unwritten journal. The Renzan had flown her missions, 16 sorties logged before internment, a handful of hits on supply convoys, but her successes tasted of ash, the Shinzan's shadow long. Matsumura lived on into the 50s, consulting on commercial birds, his designs safer, humbler. Retirement found him in Kyoto, tending a rock garden, raking patterns that evoked wing spars. He'd die in 58, quietly, the cause listed as heart strain, though friends whispered of a deeper fracture. The diary vanished into archives, surfacing sporadically in declassified briefs, a whisper in aviation journals. In 72, a researcher from the Smithsonian pieced it with wreck photos, the exhibit, A Quiet Corner. Japan's Forsaken Fortress, Ambition, and the Abyss. Mori, gray and stooped in a Yokohama flat, attended the opening via proxy. A letter read aloud, his voice too frail for travel. Captain Tanaka salutes from the waves. He flew so we could walk. Decades layered like lacquer. The war a scar faded to white, the Shinszan a footnote in modelers' catalogs, her lines etched in plastic for enthusiasts who never felt the quiver. But in quiet collections, the ones where men gather over yellowed logs, the story endures, not of a bomber that failed, but of the hands that held her aloft, breath by breath. The Renzan rose, yes, but on foundations of graves, her flights a penance paid in silence. The moral lingered, etched in every retelling. Some machines weren't feared by the enemy, they were feared by their own. You can't mass-produce courage, only the illusion of control. The Shinszan didn't fall because of design. It fell because of denial. Courage is not taking off. It's knowing you might never land. They called it Japan's B-17, but its real enemy was gravity itself. If you believe history's forgotten pilots deserve to be remembered, subscribe for more untold Woe stories.